Hey everyone, it's Malkin Live. Those of you who have known me, followed me, read me, watched me on TV, know that I am not one to employ profanity. But after the last, I don't know how long it's been, 16, 20, almost 24 hours that I have been suspended by Twitter for voicing a very common sense view that violent criminal looters should be shot, I am not going to hold back on how I feel about it. And I announced my return to Twitter this afternoon with 3 simple words. I'm back, bitches. And those of you who fall in that category, you're on notice. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the decision I made to delete the supposedly offensive and abusive, harassing, violence-inciting tweet. But before I do that, I want to reiterate that everything that I have been talking about over the past week since the outbreak of violence across the country over the last week, that I do not apologize for my defense of law and order. I admit no guilt, collective guilt, white privilege guilt, or otherwise. And I reiterate the message that I gave in my Malkin live stream broadcast the other night, that America has to pick itself up off of the streets, off of the floor, and stop groveling. And since I was suspended, I have watched several even more sickening videos of white people prostrating themselves before Black people, pastors, police, and most recently, members of the National Guard. This is an absolute disgrace. This is not how we're going to make America great again or keep it great. And in addition to all of the destruction and mayhem that we have seen in inner cities, urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, we now are seeing what the ultimate goal of many of these agitators and saboteurs has been all along: the erasing of the historic American nation. Virginia's governor has now announced that they're going to remove a statue of Robert E. Lee. And slowly, many of these statues and memorials and monuments that are a part of our history, flaws and warts and all, are about to disappear. Somebody sent me a story that some monuments are going to be removed in Texas. This is a joke. You think that you can appease the unappeasable? It's almost as comical as the idea that I once bought into, that you can govern the ungovernable. And some of you who have watched all of the graffiti that's been sprayed on Capitol buildings and government buildings across the country know what I'm talking about. I believe it was in Philadelphia where some vandal had spray painted that slogan, "We are ungovernable." Yeah, well, we're seeing that. And you know what makes them ungovernable? Feckless so-called leaders refusing to lead. It's the same old story, right? We expect Democrats to act the way that they do. But over and over again, in the more than 30 years that I've covered politics, it's spineless Beltway Republicans, virtue signaling, beseeching Republicans, whose sole goal in public life always seems to be to prove that they're not racist. I just retweeted this heinous video. I saw it on the Columbia Bugle's feed, Twitter account, of the Senate Republican Conference, simping and simpering and paying homage to the Black Lives Matter /Antifa /America Last agenda, surrendering once again to the false narrative that somehow all of us who are law-abiding, all of us who do not embrace militant identity politics, all of us who refuse to condone the lawlessness, somehow bear responsibility for George Floyd or Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or Eric Garner. This foundational lie has poisoned American politics for upwards of 3 decades. I've told you about how I started my own journalism career in the aftermath of the 1992 LA riots. And I honestly thought that Donald J. Trump was going to be the one unique politician who would be able to withstand the slings and arrows of all these various forces. I told you that I found his performance last week inadequate, insufficient, and not what I voted for. We have Jared Kushner now in charge of every aspect of domestic and foreign policy. We have our own president who was on Newsmax, the new channel that I work for, yesterday, talking to Sean Spicer. Yes, about some of the mayhem, and yes, there were forceful condemnations of the rioting. But there was also, once again, a move to appease, to remind the American public about President Trump's investments in historically Black colleges, in opportunity zones, and of course, the vaunted unemployment rate among Blacks. There's still a massive self-delusion on the part of many normie establishment Republicans that continuing to pour money into this hole is going to reap miraculous, unprecedented benefits at the ballot box in November. A lot of people are very resentful that I not only question this premise, but I reject it. I've long told you that my goal and my agenda is to inform you with the facts that you need to hear and the reality that you need to hear, not that you want to hear. And better that you hear it from me now than in all of the postmortems that are likely to occur the day after Election Day and the week after Election Day, when what I say becomes truth and reality. This doesn't make me a hater. This doesn't make me a never Trumper. This doesn't make me a liberal or a neoliberal or a neocon. It makes me a reality-based truth teller. That's why I'm here. And this gets to my decision to delete the tweet about my views regarding violent criminal looters. I do not disavow my opinion. I do not apologize for it. But these are the rules of the Twitter game. And I think it's important to me, and it's important for the things I stand for, to continue to use the platforms that I have to expose the speech squelchers and the hypocrites. And I thought that it was very fascinating. I'm going to share a screen with you of the article that Alan Bakari did at Breitbart.com regarding the decision to censor me. Let's see if I can share this. Okay. So this gives all the basic details about the actual tweet that I had tweeted on May 29th, and then the notice that I got on Wednesday telling me that I had violated Twitter's rules against abuse and harassment. There's the tweet, which I deleted, which no longer exists. And I faced this decision of deleting it, appealing it, which I had initially done, and waiting for a decision on the appeal. or just walking away, which I can't do. I can't walk away. There's too much at stake in this country. I have had this Twitter account for 12 years to the extent that I can still make a difference and have influence, as well as support others who share my opinion and amplify their voices. It was a hard decision for me. And I talked to a lot of friends about what I should do. And most people thought it was a very easy decision to just delete the tweet and move on. Well, I'm not going to move on yet because I think it's incredibly disingenuous, the statement that Twitter's spokespeople have made to various reporters, including Alam Bokhari, drawing some sort of moral equivalence between my tweet and other tweets by agitators and saboteurs on the left. So let's see if I'm going to scroll this down, see if you can see it. It's a little small, but I'm just going to read it to you. In a comment to Breitbart, Twitter emphasized that it also banned an account that was posting violent threats against the police that had been called out by Malkin in earlier tweets. So somebody in a Twitter office in Silicon Valley thought they were going to be so freaking cute by using my own tweets, calling out violent threats, and pointing to the fact that they had suspended that account after I called attention to it, and then somehow doing a gotcha on me because, oh, well, if I called that out, of course, they're forced to call me out if they were to be applying their standards equally. This is complete and utter bull crap. That's the extent of my profanity. That's as far as I'll go, but you can call it whatever you want. Bull excrement. Because let's go to, let's see if I can do this. The actual tweets that they are comparing. Let me pull this up. Okay, so this is a thread from May 27th. And you'll recall this is like within the first 24 to 48 hours of the rioting last week. And at first I had called attention to this disparity. For the past month, the media attacked peaceful anti-lockdown protesters nationwide for endangering the public. Silicon Valley deplatformed them, many of them jailed. Now, Minnesota rioters are burning buildings, robbing stores, and hurling incendiary devices at firemen and cops. How many arrests? And of course, in those early days, there were zero, precisely zero, 0.0. I then proceeded to point out that organizing protests against lockdowns is banned on Facebook and will get you suspended on Twitter. Many of you will recall that Owen Schroyer, who works for the website InfoWars for Alex Jones, was booted off of Twitter along with other InfoWars employees because he had publicized anti-lockdown protests in Texas. He was banned. He was suspended for that. I observed in this tweet that goading people to kill cops and loot police, however, is fine and dandy with Twitter safety and Yo-Yo L, who's the Twitter integrity officer, as well as CEO Jack Dorsey. And then I pointed out to the account of someone who called themselves Killing Cops is Okay. And I said, look at this thug's Twitter name and tweets. Let's look at some of the tweets, okay? God damn it, people, stay on point. Take out cops. Target didn't do anything to you. Next, guys, go there. He's directing people to the 3rd Precinct police office headquarters in Minneapolis. Use Molotovs. Wood burns. Styrofoam and gasoline makes napalm. Pool chlorine and brake fluid would get through that door pretty quick too. And here's this one. It pisses me off that in Minneapolis, Target and a Dollar Tree is on fire, but the police station isn't. Now, because I called these tweets out on Twitter, And Twitter was actually forced to fairly apply its violent threats policy. It is clear to me that they or somebody who reported to them, either in some sort of cooperative capacity or not, decided that it would be really cute to do a gotcha on me and somehow make a parallel between those violent criminal incitements against police officers, to throw Molotov cocktails at their building, to burn them down, and to, quote, take out cops, was somehow morally equivalent to me stating what most responsible law enforcement supervisors, officers, chiefs, sheriffs have said over the last week, that violent criminal looters should have to deal with deadly force. And that is either by law enforcement or armed citizens, right? So let's look now at the violent threats policy. Let's look at the actual policy of Twitter. This was published in March 2019, and it says, you may not threaten violence against an individual or a group of people. We also prohibit the glorification of violence. I was not threatening violence. I was defending a policy of peacekeeping by law enforcement officials and peace officers, that peace officers themselves have voiced in press conferences over the last week, video clips of which are allowed on Twitter. What is in violation of the violent threats policy? Under this policy, Twitter says, you can't state an intention to inflict violence on a specific person or group of people. I was not advocating that I myself intended to inflict violence on anyone. Threatening to kill someone, I was not doing. Threatening to sexually assault someone, I was not doing. Threatening to seriously hurt someone and commit a violent act that could lead to someone's death or serious physical injury, I was advocating self-defense. What is not a violation of this policy? Hyperbolic speech. Oh, well, I'm glad that they mentioned that, because while I was waiting for an appeal and before I had decided to delete my tweet, this morning I received yet another Twitter notice in which I was informed that someone had complained about content of a tweet that I had tweeted almost 6 months ago. And let me read this to you. Mass migration demographics doom American sovereignty. That was the message of my UCLA speech that got me blacklisted by YAF. It's a message of my book, Open Borders, Inc., and my CPAC speech from 2 years ago. And it's the message of kids being smeared on campuses. The establishment GOP's solution? Shoot the messengers. You're not allowed now to type the idiom, shoot the messengers, without risking a trigger of getting a complaint that you are inciting violence. In that case of using an idiom, a hyperbolic idiom, Twitter graciously investigated and determined that I had not violated any of the Twitter rules. Thanks. Thanks, Twitter. Really appreciate that one. They then say in their policy that the policy is enforced in tandem with our policies on abusive behavior and hateful conduct. And in the complaint to me from yesterday, abuse and harassment were cited. So let's take a look at this. So again, the Twitter overlords generously acknowledge that we should feel safe expressing our unique point of view, and that, they believe in freedom of speech and open dialogue. That means little as an underlying philosophy if voices are silenced because people are afraid to speak up. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I agree with that because over the course of the dozen years that I have been a Twitter user, I was one of the very first at the vanguard to generously receive a blue check mark and build up a huge following and have influence and be able to get hashtags trending before all of those were rigged, to build up an audience before there was follower suppression, and to be able to reach all of the people who followed me before there was shadow banning. But over the course of the last 12 years, and this is why the focus on Antifa and BLM and the SPLC and the right-wing watches of the world is so important, that was all before there was an orchestrated effort to harass, to dox, to smear, to suppress, and to gaslight conservative patriots on Twitter. This is the bias, right? To lie and lie and lie and lie again that our advocacy of protecting our country, fighting back against cancel culture, fighting back against cancel America culture is somehow the real threat to the United States and to open and peaceful discourse. Total bull. The policies goes on to say that wishing or hoping serious harm on a person or group of people is a violation. We do not tolerate content that wishes, hopes, or expresses a desire for death, serious bodily harm, or fatal disease against an individual or group of people. And here is the big farce, right? Here's the big farce laid bare almost every hour on Twitter. Let's pull this up. Here's Slate, left-wing liberal Slate magazine. Nonviolence is an important tool for protests, but so is violence. That seems to me to clearly fall under the category in Twitter's policy about violence as a glorification of violence. Wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago that Trump's tweet on looting resulting in shooting was hidden, right, under an editorial blanket, warning people that that tweet was a glorification of violence? Here is a tweet advocating violence as an important tool for protest and glorifying, quote, a history of violent protest. Let's see. This was published at 11:35 p.m. yesterday, June 3rd. No warning. Slate has happily continued to tweet away over the last however many hours it's been, like almost a full day and a half. No punishment for that. The policy is a joke. The idea that Twitter is a neutral platform is a joke. And the joke's on us, isn't it? Here's another one that I retweeted. Vince James caught this one. It's got nice art. The art helps you understand the intention behind the tweet. Just going to dwell on that for a second there. Yeah. When has violence ever solved anything? And it has a very positive view of the Haitian Revolution. That's allowed. Another tweet that was mentioned by several of the outlets that covered my censorship, and I want to thank them all and give them all shout outs. Loomer.com, National File, CNS News, Breitbart.com. Thank you all for covering it. Appreciate it when I didn't have a voice. several mentioned this tweet from the actor Idris Elba a couple of days ago. This ain't a movie, ain't calling cut. We cutting the throat of the old system. So if you ain't with us, then you better run. Oh, that sounds like a pretty specific threat to me, doesn't it? And then, of course, all you have to do is enter the phrase, by any means necessary, on Twitter search. And you'll get plenty of glorifications and embrace of violence. Here's one, just one of a gazillion examples. Malcolm X had the right idea. Amira says, by any means necessary, in all caps, in case you didn't get the gist of that. When we talk, we're silenced. When we beg for our lives, we're ignored. When we fight back, we're demonized. Well, F this, F that, F you, F your feelings. America, you're gonna feel our presence, I promise. That does not sound peaceful. I don't know. What do y'all think? Maybe it's just me. This does not sound like a peaceful person that I'd want to be sitting next to on a bus or at Central Park, you know, anywhere near. But you know. So I deleted my tweet, but not my underlying commitment to continue defending law and order. It's going to be another hellish night tonight, obviously, and it's not going to get any better. We've got multiple funerals and memorial services that are now being organized by the race hustler Benjamin Crump, the lawyer, of course, for the George Floyd family, previously the lawyer for Trayvon Martin's family, and the purveyor of the ultimate lie of hands up, don't shoot, which, despite being debunked even by the Obama Justice Department, continues to be the rallying cry that we're hearing in all of these cities. Last night, the night before that, tomorrow, the night after that, the night after that. So Joe Biden is going to be invited VIP at these funerals, and I have just read that Al Sharpton and company, the original lying liar of the social justice left, is going to be leading a march on Washington in August. What are you going to do when that happens? Where are you going to be? Is there going to be a resistance to this organized and vehement and violence-marked effort to undermine America, to cancel America? I'm going to do everything in my power to be there, whatever form their march takes. This is really an ultimate showdown. Probably going to be on the mall. And if you don't show up, if you remain silent, as I often say, borrowing the left's own phrase, silence is complicity. It's law-abiding people like you and me who have long embraced the idea and passed on to our children that we must stand our ground in small ways and large. That's why I'm back on Twitter. That's why I'm using my YouTube platform much more than I used to. Speaking of which, I just posted a documentary on Black Lives Matter that I had originally hosted in 2017. And there are some fantastic perspectives from the scholar Carol Swain, former Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, and others. And 3 years ago, I had warned that Black Lives Matter and its explicitly anti-white, anti-cop curriculum was seeping into K through 12 public schools. And who was primarily responsible for getting that curriculum into the schools? It wasn't BLM. It was the government-subsidized organization Teach for America, which has been thoroughly infested with these anti-American, anti-cop, anti-white types. That was 3 years ago, and nothing's been done. And you can imagine now that with many of these bend-over Republicans, that some of this curriculum will probably be subsidized even more, right? As a SOP, as a payment, as reparations. We're going to be having hearings that reflect all of the left-wing narratives about these riots, the whitewashing of all of it. And in a way, I mean, it's a little beneficial that so many schools from K through 12 to the college and university level have been shut down because of the other ridiculous pandemic, right? We've got a lot of viruses and a lot of pandemics and epidemics that we're fighting. But the schools, of course, are shut down. Summer camps are shut down. So many kids across the country are not able to have any symbol of normalcy, while lots of these other youths, right, across the country are all breathing on each other, spitting on our cops, stabbing them in the neck. I just saw the story from a couple of hours ago of a black NYPD officer who was stabbed in the neck while on anti-looting duty. You think you're going to see that mentioned in a Senate Republican conference video paying homage to BLM and George Floyd? No. Do you think you're going to see it on MSNBC and CNN and the Washington Post? No. Speaking of things that are not getting in the news, but for those who are tuned in, there's been plenty of exposure to it because of our continued existence on these platforms. Two huge developments today in the fight against Antifa. We had Project Veritas release what I believe is its most important work, having infiltrated one of the granddaddies of Antifa chapters, the Rose City Antifa chapter in Oregon. And there it is, all laid bare, their embrace of violent tactics to bring down America. The second very related story, and of course, both of these stories are inextricably linked to the violence in America, America on Fire, was a press conference by Andy Ngo, the independent journalist in Portland, Oregon, and his lawyer Harmeet Dillon, announcing a lawsuit against Antifa, Rose City Antifa, for multiple incidents. Everyone knows about the most famous one or infamous one in which Andy was beaten and bloodied, had multiple objects thrown at his head, causing him to have a brain hemorrhage. But before and after, he had been the victim of organized and systemic violence by Rose City Antifa members. And I posted several pages from the complaint as well as a link to the full complaint. One of the claims, there's 4 claims, and one of the legal claims has to do with racketeering. I mention all of this because you may be wondering, as I had been, what happened to President Trump's announcement several days ago that Antifa was going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. Long overdue, in the opinion of many of us who've been covering Antifa since the beginning of the Trump presidency. I haven't seen a draft. I have seen no announcement from the Justice Department, and I've actually seen conflicting statements from various White House officials and Justice Department officials about whether this is actually going to happen and what the actual implications are legally and from a criminal standpoint in making that designation. I've asked a lot of friends about this as well, who are lawyers, what it would actually mean if there was such a designation. Like, what will happen? What can happen now? And there are expanded investigative powers that federal officials can have when it comes to designations of foreign terrorist organizations. In the past, when I worked in the Pacific Northwest at the Seattle Times, I had covered the work of JTTF agents. That's the Federal Joint Anti-Terrorism Task Forces that pull in local, state, and federal resources and have a coordinated response to terrorist organizations. And back in the late 90s and early 2000s, the JTTF was able to use those investigative powers to go after radical environmental groups, which were perpetrating violence on research labs and individuals and corporations that they were trying to bring down. So the Animal Liberation Front, ALF, ELF, the Earth Liberation Front, Earth Firster types that were driving spikes into trees to try and stop clear cutting, and causing damage and I believe physical harm to people who are working in the timber industry, like Weyerhaeuser in the Pacific Northwest and whatnot. And in my reporting, that's the last time there was such a concerted effort against a domestic terrorist organization as opposed to a foreign one. And a friend of mine noted that any criminal activity that Antifa is engaged in is already against the law. So really, the domestic terrorist organization is a way of providing an umbrella to expand the investigative powers. I think it's way overdue for the feds, if they're not doing it already, to be looking at the Twitter cesspool. Every single day, Antifa agents and many of their left-wing journalist operative tools are targeting ordinary citizens, right? Not people with blue check marks, because, that's what they want is low-hanging fruit, people who are unable to fight back. And that, of course, has included many Proud Boys, many citizen journalists. You all saw that Cassandra Fairbanks, who I just had on the power panel for Malkin Live last week, a video that's available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Michelle Malkin, had some of these Antifa types leak her private residence. She has a 9-year-old daughter. She has a 9-year-old daughter. And she was alone with her daughter at home when people came to her house. And this was in the middle of the riots, and the police couldn't and didn't do anything about it. That kind of targeting is happening every day. It's happened every day for the last 3 years by many of the same types who can often get credentials at conservative confabs like Con Inc. This is insane, and it's evil, and it has to stop. And there should be a central clearinghouse of information. They should be taking names, taking down cases. There should be a hotline for victims of Antifa to be able to call the White House or the federal government or the Justice Department. Are we going to get serious when we say that we're going to treat these organizations like terrorist organizations, right? Are we going to get serious, or is this just a campaign pledge or a way of getting people off of your back? I'm just so outraged by people who pay lip service and won't actually do something. Hashtag do something. I'm going to pivot. And it is related. It's related because we have people in the White House who are not on our side. And one of those people that I have been hammering at, and many America First users of Twitter, students, journalists, have been hammering at for months and months and months now, is the Jared Kushner faction of the Oval Office. It's been more than a month since the gesture executive order on the immigration ban was signed. We're supposed to have some sort of indication by now, because there was a 30-day period that Trump was supposed to have to get feedback from key cabinet secretaries on whether he should expand and extend the so-called ban that covered a measly 10 to 20% of green card applicants and holders, and did nothing to stop the massive inflow of millions of temporary foreign workers into the country, when now more than 41 million Americans remain out of work. There's no word on that yet. And I have heard from a White House source that there may be some progress on this, and we've had some good reporting from the great stalwart immigration policy reporters at Breitbart and Ryan Gerdusky, who I've interviewed, Pedro Gonzalez at American Greatness, that there will be some SOP on H-1B or OPT. But the Open Borders Inc. forces have redoubled their efforts. I think that they are using the cover of the riots to do all of their swampy things when nobody is looking. And of course, there was a lot of outrage this morning before I had been able to get back on Twitter. Emerald Robinson, who is a fantastic reporter, now my colleague at Newsmax, disclosing that there have been meetings convened by Jared Kushner on pushing a deal on DACA, the administrative amnesty that was rammed through illegally and unconstitutionally by Barack Obama, that hands deportation passes, waivers, to 800,000 young illegal aliens, as well as work permits. That's the thing that a lot of people forget, right? It's not just that you're showing compassion because these kids came here through no fault of their own, blah, blah, blah. They should get government subsidized public education. They should get access to government subsidized public universities and colleges, blah, blah, blah. No, they're getting jobs as well. And that's what this is all about. That's why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce supports extending and codifying the DACA deal. That's why Koch is for it. That's why Cato is for it. All of Open Borders Inc. and the swamp Republicans who have been quietly working on the so-called DACA fix behind the scenes in anticipation of the Supreme Court, probably in the next week or two, striking down the DACA deal and paving the way for Open Borders Inc. and both parties to give the illegal alien lobby what they want. We have seen in many of these riots that there have been Latino agitators with their Mexican flags and their usual open borders slogans and their fists riding on the coattails of Antifa and BLM and all of these vultures. Don't you think they're watching and listening and learning and understanding that to get what they want, this is what you do. I just have to laugh because apparently there have been people in the White House since the outbreak of the George Floyd riots, the 2020 riots, who thought this was all just going to blow over, who thought that Trump could just wait it out. Just let them blow off some steam, vent a little bit, and then just get back to business. Talk about the GDP and the stock market and our 401ks and, oh yeah, the black unemployment rate. Well, never mind. Let's not talk about that for a while, right? You think this is going to die down? This is the worst outbreak of anarchy that I have covered, that I have witnessed in my lifetime since the 1992 LA riots. This is not going to stop. Not next week, not through all of Funeral Palooza, not through the day that the Supreme Court makes its decision and announcement on DACA, not in August when Al Sharpton and his minions show up on the mall, and certainly not until every historic American monument is torn down, right? Have you seen this? They're not going to stop. So how do we stop them? Well, we don't do it by cowering. You don't do it by appeasing. You can't win against these people by doing the Cupid shuffle. Oh my gosh, I have to find this. Right? You guys see this? Right? Can't we all just get along? That's not going to do it. That's not how we win. That's not how we restore peace, order, law, or sanity in this country. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, right? Because, oh, isn't that great? Look at that. And the pastor was kneeling on the ground and begging for forgiveness and all the tears and the hugs. It's not going to work, right? We need more Drew Breeses, right? We need people to stand up to cancel culture, to cancel America culture. For the last 3 decades, and this is why I did the documentary on Black Lives Matter in the schools. Generations of school kids have been taught to hate their country and to hate themselves, to constantly apologize and capitulate and grovel because they don't hyphenate their identity, because they don't consider themselves African American or Asian American or Hispanic American, right? Or because they reject the idea that because they're white, that they automatically have privilege. Everywhere I've lived, I have worked alongside, befriended, enjoyed the company of, interviewed, come to love people who are white, who come from all circumstances and backgrounds. They've come from broken homes. They have endured physical suffering, emotional suffering, psychological suffering. Ever since I started my career, I have befriended hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women, mostly men, who work in law enforcement, who take pride in wearing the uniform, and who don't get up every day wanting to perpetrate racism or patriarchy or oppression. They're just ordinary, good men and women. The vast, vast, vast majority of peace officers. And you all know that I've covered law enforcement in all of its capacities, right? Local, state, and federal level. I spent much of my fall season last year standing up for ICE agents. I have friends from the Border Patrol, not just on the southern border, but on the northern border, on both coasts. People that I had come into contact with when I worked at the Seattle Times in the Pacific Northwest, who policed the long neglected northern border up there, as well as on the East Coast, who I'm still in touch with. They're good people. They deserve to be defended. And we can only do that if we're standing on our feet, not on our knees. I'll be back tomorrow, and I am planning on bringing back many of the guests that I've had over the last 3 weeks on Malkin Live on the streams, as well as many new guests as well. I always welcome recommendations, so make sure that you leave them in the comments on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Michelle Malkin. And you can, of course, reach me on Twitter while I'm still there. But I urge people to make sure to subscribe to my accounts on all of the alternatives. I'm on Telegram at Michelle Malkin. That's my favorite one of all of the different options. I'm also now on Parler, and I have to thank Laura Loomer for helping me get set up there and verified. I know a lot of people like using Parler, and I promise I will be using that more. I'm still on Instagram, and for the longest time, I tried to keep it non-political. And so I was under this still sort of self-delusion that most people operated in good faith, and that one of the reasons why the left and the right were so acrimonious is because the left did not perceive people on the right as human beings. And I thought, well, it would be good optics if people would see me as a mother, with my kids, hiking, which I love to do, or playing pickleball, which is my new passion. I know it's so old, but whatever. It's not. It's great. I love it. Or if they saw me, with my family or vacationing or this, forget it. Right? I know that so many of you, the other day when it was Blackout Tuesday or whatever it was, it's just like there was this mob mentality that if you did not post the black slate, how dare you? How dare you? It was like an international human rights violation not to bend the knee, not to post the black slate. And, I heard even from my kids, my 19-year-old and 16-year-old, that their peers and people, influencers that they follow, were getting harangued for saying nothing, right? It's not enough to privately have the right opinion, right? You've got to show your virtue. I felt sorry. I used to follow several fitness Instagram accounts, right? Just nice moms. There's a mom account and just nice women. And the mob went after a young, blonde, beautiful, successful fitness Instagram influencer that I follow, because she actually just put her head down and did her job. And she was posting ab videos and glute videos. And yeah, I love those. But since she hadn't done enough to apologize for her race, thousands of people swarmed her account, and she ended up yesterday posting a tear-filled apology. And then there were demands. That wasn't enough. Well, great, so you cry, but how come you're not supporting Black-owned businesses? She's a fitness influencer. This is the world we live in. So it's happening there. It's happening to the kids. If the kids didn't have the black slate, they were all eating each other alive. This is nuts. This is intolerable. And when we don't speak up and say something about it, this country is a lost cause. Okay? This is not great. Tens of millions of people are out of work. This is a powder keg, and you can see the intersection of all of the terrible policy decisions that the federal government and many state governments made in underreacting and then overreacting and doubling down on the pandemic, creating a powder keg of jobless young people with nothing to do and all the incentives in the world to burn our country down. We got to get up off our knees. I'll see you tomorrow.